If you've ever been underestimated, cornered, or betrayed by family, you're trying to love, this story is for you. Subscribe to Revenge with DMA for real-life inspired stories of quiet strength, sharp justice, and powerful healing. Has someone ever crossed a line with you and thought you wouldn't notice? Tell us your story in the comments. My name is Dylan, 32 years old. Software developer, the kind of guy who's always been told he's too calm, too polite, and according to my wife's mother, too soft to be taken seriously. She never said it to my face. But I heard the whispers, the backhanded compliments, the just teasing digs over holiday meals, and eventually, I started listening. Her name is Margaret, a woman who thinks elegance is control, who keeps her hair perfect, her opinions sharp, and her husband quiet. When Emily and I got engaged, Margaret made it clear I wasn't her first choice, or second, probably. Not even third, but Emily loved me. I loved her, and for a while, I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. Not for Margaret. It happened on a Sunday, a simple family dinner, their house. Candlelit, polished silver, perfect napkin folds, Margaret's version of warmth. I helped set the table. Margaret smiled too wide. "You really don't have to, Dylan," she said, "but then again, you do seem to enjoy domestic roles." I laughed it off. Like I always did. Emily shot me a look. Sorry again. We sat down. The meal began, and that's when I saw it, barely a flicker. But I caught it. Margaret reached toward the glasses while everyone was distracted by her story about the old days in Paris. Her hand hovered, then moved my water glass. Subtle reposition. I've written thousands of lines of code in my life. Debugged things no one else could spot, and in that moment, I knew something was wrong. I watched her hand retreat. She smiled again. Too wide, too still. That's when I made the decision. When no one was looking, I swapped my glass with her husband's. Harold, soft-spoken, tired-eyed, the kind of man who hadn't said a full sentence at dinner in months. He took a sip without hesitation. Margaret's eyes flicked to me, then to the glass, then to him, and then everything changed. It didn't take long. 10 minutes maybe. Harold had just finished a story about his garden, his voice soft, hands twitching slightly as he described tomatoes that never ripened on time. He reached for the water again, took another sip, and started blinking. Slowly, like something wasn't sinking inside him. He set the glass down unevenly. It wobbled, then he rubbed his temple. Emily leaned toward him, concerned. "Dad? You okay?" Margaret's face paled not. Enough for the room to notice. But I saw it. Her lips parted, her fingers clenched slightly against the napkin in her lap. I think I need to lie down," Harold said. It was the first time I'd ever heard him interrupt Margaret. He stood up to fast, stumbled slightly. Emily got up to help him. Margaret hovered, but didn't touch him. I stood too, just enough to catch her eye across the table, and in that look, something passed between us. Not words, not accusation, just recognition. She knew what I had done, and worse, she knew that I had seen her, but she said nothing, because women like Margaret don't confront in the open. They operate in half glances. Softened insults, poisoned glasses in candlelight. Harold went to bed early. Emily tucked him in, said he was just tired. Probably too much wine. I nodded. Yeah, must have been. Margaret didn't speak the rest of the evening. Not to me, not to Emily, not to anyone. She just cleared the dishes with robotic precision. I offered to help. She declined. Of course she did. I left that night with Emily, hand in hand, her humming softly to a song on the car radio. She didn't notice the way I stared out the window, the way my knuckles were pale against the wheel, because Something inside me had shifted. She had tried to drug me. I didn't know with what. I didn't care. What mattered was, she wanted me quiet, removed, dulled, and instead, her husband had paid the price. The man who barely spoke, but always pulled out her chair. The man who trimmed the edges of her hedges without being asked. That night, I sat at my desk until 2 in the morning, pulled up browser tabs, looked up mild sedatives. How they worked. What symptoms matched. Not because I was scared, because I was preparing. The next morning, I texted Harold, "Hey, hope you're feeling better. Can I ask you something off the record?" He replied within minutes, "Of course." "Something wrong?" "Did your water taste strange last night?" 3 dots. Typing. Then actually, yeah. Bitter. Why? That was enough for me. More than enough. Now I had 2 things Margaret never thought I'd have. Proof and a witness. I didn't tell Emily. Not yet. Not because I was afraid she wouldn't believe me, but because I needed to be certain about what had happened and who her mother really was when no one was watching. I spent the next few days in silence, not avoidance, strategy, because some people expose themselves faster if you stop warning them. I started with a test. I called Margaret from my office line. "Hi, Margaret. Just checking in. Harold feeling better?" There was a pause. Then she said too quickly, "Oh yes, just fine. A little low blood sugar, probably. Interesting. Strange." He said his water tasted bitter. Another pause longer. I heard her exhale. "Did it?" she asked. Voice flat. Apparently, she didn't answer. So I let the silence grow until she filled it, and she did. "You know, Dylan, not everything requires suspicion. Sometimes people get sick. That's all." I nodded into the phone. "Of course. Just concerned, that's all." And I hung up. She didn't call back, didn't text, but I knew she'd heard something in my tone, a shift she hadn't expected from the man she once called harmless. That weekend, we were invited back for another dinner. Emily wanted to go. Mom said she's making that pear-glazed roast you like. I smiled. Perfect. I'll bring dessert. I arrived 30 minutes early alone. Said Emily was running late. Margaret was setting the table, pearls on, apron still crisp. She barely looked at me. "You're early." "I am," I said, placing the dessert box on the counter. Figured I'd help. She nodded, then turned her back, which gave me just enough time. From my coat pocket, I pulled a small black box, flat, magnetic, discreet. Inside, a small test strip kit, something a friend in biotech had gifted me months ago for fun. "You'd be surprised how many hands touch open drinks," he said then. "Never hurts to know what's in your glass." Margaret stepped out to fix the lighting. I ran a strip through 2 glasses, hers and Harold's. Her glass, clean. Harold's, a faint reaction, trace alkaloids, same as last week. That was all I needed. I left the strip inside a sealed plastic pouch and returned the glasses untouched. I knew what she was doing now. It wasn't about removing me. It was about controlling him. That night, as we all sat down to eat, I watched her pour water for Harold again. This time, I didn't swap glasses. I stopped her hand instead. "Let me," I said, gently taking the pitcher. She stiffened. I poured Harold's water first, then my own. She didn't speak for the rest of the meal, but I noticed something. Harold smiled more than once. He cracked a small joke about the roast being too fancy to be trusted. Emily laughed. Margaret didn't. Later, as we were leaving, Harold walked me to the car. "I know what you did," he said. I paused. "What do you mean?" "The glass. That first night. You switched it, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. I don't know what she put in it, I said. But I knew it wasn't right, he sighed. I've been suspicious for a while. The sleepy nights, the mornings I couldn't remember, my stomach turned. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, because no one listens to the quiet man. They listen to the woman who knows where the silverware goes. He looked at me. I'm tired of forgetting what I don't deserve to forget. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not crazy. You're not alone. But you need to take the first step. He nodded. I will. And thank you, Dylan, for seeing what no one else wanted to. The next day, I met with a lawyer, a friend of mine, someone discreet. I explained everything. The symptoms, the test strips, the audio recordings I had started making on my phone. He listened carefully, then said, "This isn't just family drama, Dylan. This could be considered felony poisoning. You're walking a very thin line ethically and legally." I nodded. I don't want revenge. I want truth. And I want him safe. He nodded back. I'll guide you. Over the next 2 weeks, we collected evidence. Margaret kept her routine, and Harold kept letting her, until one night, he didn't. I got a call at 11:47 p.m. "Dylan," he whispered. I left. I'm at a hotel. I didn't drink it. I sat up in bed. Good. Stay there. I'll be there in 10 minutes. When I arrived, he handed me a glass wrapped in a plastic bag, the one she poured that night. We tested it, same traces. Stronger this time. We didn't wait. Harold contacted a family attorney. Quietly, he had the house keys changed. The accounts separated. A wellness check scheduled through a third-party social worker. Margaret came home to an empty house, frozen assets, and a lawyer's letter on the counter. Emily didn't know yet, not until Harold set her down and told her everything. She wept, not because she didn't believe him, but because deep down, she had always suspected. I just never thought she'd do that. I did, I said quietly. That's why I stayed calm. And she looked at me differently after that, not like the soft-spoken husband she defended, but like the man who saw what others wouldn't dare confront. Margaret tried to spin the story. She said Harold was manipulated, that I planted something, that it was a power grab. But when the tests came back from the lab, her story didn't hold. The case didn't go to court. Harold didn't want it public. He just wanted distance, dignity. They filed for divorce 2 months later. He moved into a small townhouse near the library, planted tomatoes again, this time. They ripened early. He came over for dinner last week, brought a bottle of wine and a smile I hadn't seen in years. I remember everything now, he said, raising a glass. And this time, we all drank safely, not because the water was clean, but because the poison had finally been named. Margaret didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't cry, at least not in front of us, when Harold served the divorce papers. She simply folded them, pressed her lips together, then whispered, "You'll regret this." He didn't answer, didn't need to. That was the last time they spoke in person. She moved out within the week. Her exit was precise clothes, jewelry, monogrammed towels, gone in one afternoon. The framed photo of their wedding still hung in the hallway after she left. Harold took it down the next day and donated it to a thrift store. He never looked back. Emily and I didn't talk about it much at first, not because it wasn't there between us, but because it lived in everything: the careful way we made coffee, the extra moment she took before answering a call from her mother, the way I reached for her hand more often, and she let me. One night, she finally asked, "Do you think she ever really loved us?" Me? Him? We were lying on the couch, soft lamp on, her feet tangled in a blanket over my lap. I didn't rush the answer. I think I said slowly that Margaret loved being needed, not in a nurturing way, in a controlling one, and when people started seeing through it, she called that betrayal. Emily nodded. Her eyes didn't water. They just went still. I used to think she was just strong. She was, I said. Strong. Sharp. But not kind. Silence stretched between us. Then she whispered, "You could have let it slide. You could have stayed quiet. Protected me. Protected the wedding. But you didn't." I turned toward her. "I did protect you." She looked up, and I saw it land, not just the words, but the reason. Because love isn't quiet when safety is at stake. Love is the person who speaks up, who switches the glass, who risks comfort for the truth. A month later, we held a small dinner at our place, not a holiday. No occasion, just Harold, Emily's younger brother Sam, and two friends. Harold brought wine again. He made a joke this time about choosing it himself. Everyone laughed. At the end of the meal, he pulled out a small wooden box and handed it to me. Inside was a pocket watch, clean silver, quiet tick, engraved on the back, "For the one who paid attention." I turned it over in my palm. Careful. Moved. "Your grandfather gave it to me," Harold said. "Use this to remember moments that matter." I forgot too many. "But you didn't." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded and promised myself I will never unsee again. Not in this family. Not in my marriage. Not in myself. Margaret never resurfaced. She sent Emily one letter typed, not handwritten, flat, defensive. Cold. It ended with, "I was only trying to protect you from him. From a man who sees too much, speaks too little, and doesn't belong at our table." Emily read it, then burned it, not out of rage, but because some words don't deserve a drawer. She looked at me and said, "You belong wherever I am." And that was that. Harold is doing well. He joined a local gardening club, learned how to make sourdough from scratch. He's thinking of teaching mentoring younger couples, sharing what he learned the hard way about staying too silent too long. Sometimes we sit together in the backyard, watching the tomatoes grow. "Funny," he said once, "how things bloom once the poison's gone." I didn't say anything, just passed him a glass of clean water. No tension. No second guesses. Just trust, and that is the family I chose, not through blood, but through clarity, through choosing to speak when it counted, through knowing that the ones who try to silence you usually fear what you might say, and once you say it, they lose the power they never deserved. Some stories don't end in courtrooms. Not every betrayal comes with handcuffs or a headline. Sometimes the justice is quieter than that. Sometimes it looks like this. A woman who once controlled every conversation sits at a holiday table by herself, while the people she thought would always orbit her have finally stepped into their own sun. Margaret wasn't arrested. Harold chose not to press charges. "I want peace, not scandal," he told the attorney, but that didn't mean she walked away unscathed, because when the silence came, it was the loudest thing she had ever heard. 3 months after Harold filed for divorce, Margaret moved in with her sister out of state. She tried to keep contact with Emily, sporadically birthday cards with quotes about forgiveness, text messages with passive-aggressive prayers, and one email that ended with, "One day, you'll see how deeply I loved you, even if I had to make hard choices." Emily didn't reply. She didn't block her either. She just chose not to continue the conversation. That was her version of grace, and it was powerful, because Margaret never knew what to do with people she couldn't manipulate, especially when they didn't scream, didn't fight, just turned away. That was the moment she truly lost. A year passed. Emily and I got married. Not a big wedding, just 40 people in a sunlit garden. No drama, no pretending. Harold walked her down the aisle. He wore a navy suit, a silver tie, and the proudest smile I've ever seen on his face when he reached the altar. He kissed her cheek and whispered something I'll never forget. You picked the man who saw you and your mother clearly. That word again, clearly, that's all I had ever tried to do, not fix, not dominate, just see. And when you see something clearly, you can never unsee it. That's what scared Margaret the most. She had spent a lifetime blurring lines between love and control, protection and possession, manners and manipulation. I didn't destroy her. I simply refused to let her rewrite the script anymore. We moved into a small house with a red door and a lemon tree in the backyard. Emily planted lavender in the garden. Harold came by on Sundays with sourdough, fresh tomatoes and quiet wisdom. Sometimes he'd stay to watch old movies or fix things he swore were just slightly off. One afternoon, he paused in the doorway and said, "It's been a long time since this felt like home." I asked what changed. He looked around at Emily, barefoot in the kitchen, at the dog napping by the couch, at the windows open to clean spring air, and said, "No one's watching anyone else here." That's what changed. There's no fear in the room. That stayed with me, because control doesn't always come with yelling. Sometimes it's just the way someone looks at you after every sentence, waiting for your response to see if you'll fall in line. Margaret had been the center of that kind of gravity, and it took everything to break free. Now, we were floating but anchored in something real. I got a letter last month, and a return address. But I knew the handwriting .margaret.it wasn't long. 2 paragraphs. Dylan, I've thought a lot about that night. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like, that it was something harmless, something diluted. But I also know you saw me, and I hate that I let you see me like that. I was never trying to hurt Harold. I just didn't want to lose control. And I did, and I lost more than I expected. No apology, not really, just a slow unraveling, a realization that her power hadn't been taken from her. She had given it away by forgetting the difference between fear and love. I didn't reply, not out of revenge, but because some lessons only land when no one answers the echo. Now, life is simple, honest, unperformed. Emily teaches music at a local school. I freelance and run a quiet blog about navigating toxic family dynamics with grace. We hike, we read, we keep our phones on silent after 7 p.m. Some nights, we sit on the porch and talk about the life. We almost had the one where I kept swallowing what I knew just to keep the peace in a house built on eggshells. And then we laugh because that version of us is gone and what's left is better. They say revenge is best served cold, but I don't think this was revenge. Not really. Revenge wants a winner, a loser, a slammed door, and a raised voice. This was quieter, deeper, stronger. This was justice with a soft voice and a steady hand, because the woman who tried to silence me with a sip of water ended up choking on her own reflection, and the man she underestimated built something far stronger than resentment, a family, a future, a home without poison. So, if you ask me what I did after she spiked my drink, I'll tell you, I didn't get even. I got free, and I never needed a second glass to know how powerful that would feel.